Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Heart to Heart series. This is the last Heart to Heart series for the year. I am so excited to present to you this special episode on self-care and the 3 E's. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into self-care and how to take care of ourselves and our loved ones during COVID. We know that the prisons across the nation have been ravaged by COVID-19, and we know that there are a lot of there's a lot of feeling of hopelessness in some ways, and feeling like there's so much we need to be doing for our loved ones. But we do have to take a moment to take care of ourselves. If we can't help ourselves, how can we help anyone else? I wanted to introduce to you our 3 lovely panelists, all of them who have done tremendous work in both criminal justice, but also self-care. So I wanted to introduce Vita Ajamu. She's the Director of Community Engagement and Diversity, Director of Community Engagement and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives at the National Civil Rights Museum. Dr. Avon Hart Johnson is president and co-founder of the DC Project Connect. Ro Clausen is the founder of Strong Prison Wives and Families. And welcome, ladies, to our Heart to Heart series today. I want to start by talking to Vita and asking, how did you get into this work? Give us a little bit about your background and why you think self-care is important to you.
I got into this work because of my brother. I was his advocate. This work was really, really tough. My brother, when I started advocating for him, he had a life sentence. And I made a promise to my father on his deathbed that I would never stop fighting for my brother's freedom. And that was heavy within itself. But the whole process of the advocating and trying to balance everything, life, family, work, and trying to obtain his freedom was really difficult. So I had to lean on self-care. Self-care was that balance for me. It's so important. And it doesn't mean that you're going to leave your loved one behind. What it means is that you're going to take care of yourself while advocating for your loved one.
Mm-hmm. Ro, what about you? How'd you get into this work and the importance of self-care to you?
Yeah, I got into this because my loved one was serving this crazy longer than life sentence for robberies where they stacked the charges on top of each other, where most of us here know all about the mandatory minimum sentences. And this was a long time ago. He served 20 years. Back then, there was nothing really for me online to go to for support. And people in my life really didn't understand. At best, they would kind of nod and smile to my face and probably whisper behind my back. And at worst, they would say the cruelest things to me directly to my face. So I went online, I searched, there wasn't much out there back then. And what was out there lived to this stigma that I knew we could break. I knew that we could do so much better than this. So I figured if it's not out there, I'll build it. And I started building Strong Prison Wives and Families, and it just started to grow. There was such a need for a positive, supportive community that did live against this stigma. And then also, on the other hand, the system, the prison system that robbed my loved one away from me for potentially the rest of our lives, I felt like I didn't want to let them win. So not only was me supporting other men and women through this journey a way for me not to let them win, me making sure that I take care of myself and not curling up in a ball and staying in bed all day and not taking care of myself and neglecting my responsibilities. That was a way for me to not allow them to win as well. I knew intuitively that I needed to take care of myself and pass that along to others, help them take care of themselves so that we could all be strong and get through this together.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Avon, can you explain how you got into this work and the importance of self-care to you?
Absolutely. So I'm from the Washington, D.C. area where incarceration rates are staggering. And I have not been spared. My family has been incarcerated. And I used to tell a very touching story about family members very close to me where I went through my own personal trauma. And now I realize I don't own their story, but what I do own is the responsibility of, through my work, ensuring that family members have the support that they need. I have been in prisons so many times to visit my family members, and I remember just how intimidating it was. And that led way to me working on my doctoral studies about 7 years ago, where I began to conduct research and learn a little bit more about what was going on, not just with me, but with everyone else that I found was suffering in silence. And so through my doctoral work, I identified a theory called symbolic imprisonment, grief, and coping theory. And what that suggests is that individuals were grieving deeply and sometimes complicated grief as if a loved one had died. That was the intensity of it all. A social detachment where they were feeling withdrawn by choice or by force, feeling stigmatized. And that I call symbolic imprisonment. And then denial, self-denial, denying self of care, the care that you want, punishing oneself, thinking that somehow you could have stopped the event from occurring, feeling guilty about not being there for the phone calls 24/7, basically socially isolating oneself because of this phenomena of what I call, in short, SIG-C. And so I found my passion and my love through this work.
So that takes me to my first question, which is, I know that, as I said at the top of the hour, that there are lots of people and families who are, they feel hopeless with the COVID ravaging the prisons, and they can't necessarily do anything immediate to help besides advocate. And when you say to them, take care of yourself, we need you to take care of yourself, it's kind of like, how can I take care of myself when I don't know what's happening with my loved one? And so I want to start, and I'll ask Ro, how do you convince families, convince people who have a loved one behind bars right this hour, who are suffering in the way that they are suffering, or potential suffering, that they have to take care of themselves?
Yeah. So first of all, let's just flip that. How do you take care of your loved one if you don't take care of yourself? It's just a flipped perspective of that. And I'll tell you a little story. When Adam and I first got back in touch, I felt obligated to be the one that did something to get him out. And I would sit in front of my computer for every free moment around my job, my other responsibilities. So it would be, I would wake up in the morning on a Saturday and I'd sit in front of the computer 8, 10, 12 hours sometimes and just research and try to figure out the way that I was going to get him out, because this was so unfair. And I would repeat it on Sunday, and then I would repeat it at 5 o'clock when I would get off of work. And I stopped eating and I stopped working out. And I was literally 9 months into this, probably 100 pounds. I was living on, oh, this is so embarrassing to admit, but I was living on just coffee, cigarettes, and an apple and peanut butter every single day. And none of my clothes fit me anymore. So I went shopping. I'm petite. So I had to buy clothes at this point out of the children's section. And I was in Old Navy and I was trying on a pair of children's sized pants. And I looked in the mirror, and all I saw, it hit me like a ton of bricks at this point, was a gray shell of the bubbly, happy woman I was before. And I promised myself in that moment that I was going to get healthy. I didn't want to die on the inside. And I kind of had to have this pep talk with myself and say, my loved one is on the inside, and the last thing that he wants for me is to be out here suffering. Yes, he's inside, and yes, he can't participate in things like the holidays or things like that, but it's worse for him. He's already dealing with the guilt of leaving me alone on the holidays. Your loved one is already dealing with the guilt of you feeling so hopeless and on top of it, if you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to make it worse for them. So my advice to everybody is to just remember, it's the cheesiest, overused cliche, but when you're on an airplane and oxygen masks come down, you have to put yours on first before you put one on somebody else, because you need to breathe in order to live long enough to help somebody else breathe. And that's what I had to tell myself. The other thing that I want to pass along are positive affirmations. Those were huge for me because often we don't believe it and we do neglect ourselves. So if you could just say, I deserve to feel good. I deserve to feel happy. I deserve, we're in the holidays, I deserve all of the joy this season has to offer. Eventually you'll start feeling better, and eventually the sun will come out, and eventually you'll start believing it. So I know it's scary right now. We get emails from inside of prison, hundreds, how horrible it is right now with COVID inside. I think you need to limit your exposure to a lot of stuff, unplug at a certain point, and really just focus on yourself.
Absolutely. Great advice and great tips. Vita. So, I met Vita when I first started here at FAMM, and one of the things that I just always admired about her was she held a full-time job. She has a full family. She has all of these things going on, but if you call her, she's at whatever thing she needs to be at to advocate on behalf of her brother, but also other people who are incarcerated. And she's one of these people who, it's like, how do you fit it all in? And then you're like, okay, so she brought up the fact that she practices self-care, and I'm like, how do you, even me as someone who doesn't have half of that? I have any children, it's just me and my brother hanging out there. But Vita is out here doing so much. Can you tell me a little bit about your practices? How do you do it?
So let me tell you, the first thing for me is I make sure that I put me on my calendar every single day. I start my day with me in mind. I leave the end of my day with me in mind. So let me just back up just a little bit here. So my brother, he was denied clemency twice. And that second time he was denied clemency, right before President Obama left office, I thought I had no chance at all. And I was so tired. I had advocated so much and I had cried so many tears. And, it's just so much, that was going on. And I had a really, really bad migraine. And my brother called me. He would call me weekly. And I had this awful migraine and could barely talk to him. And he said to me, he called me twin. And he said, twin, if something happens to you, I don't know what I would do. Take care of yourself. And I said, wow, he thinks enough about me to tell me to make sure I take care of myself. So I thought I was already kind of taking care of myself, but I had gotten in that push with a whole lot of other people where I needed to get his name before President Obama, right? So at that moment, that was a true wake up call for me. And I decided no matter what, I'm first. And so you want to know a little bit of what that looks like for me. So I start my day every single morning giving gratitude before I even get out of bed. The things that I'm grateful for. And I'm also going to say my brother is free now. We'll talk about that later. But I give gratitude every single day before I get out of the bed. But before I start my day, I have meditation. I write in my journal. I do affirmations. And sometimes after that, depends on how much time I have, then I may go for a walk. If I don't, that's fine. But I'm gonna make sure, no matter what, and we all can give ourselves 15 minutes a day, 15, 30 minutes. If that means waking up just a little bit earlier, right? And that gives me that energy I need because I have a family, as Rabia said. I have a full-time demanding job that I must do. And that gives me the energy I need to push forward and tackle my tasks, any challenges I may have, and even the simple things like opening up the windows, the blinds or the curtains. Let some light in, listen to some music. So at the end of the day, every single night, regardless to how much time, how late it is, I take a long bath and I listen to relaxing music. And so those are things that I make sure that I do for me. And I think that everybody should find something that works for them. Everybody can find a little something that works for you. But the goal is to put yourself on your list every single day so you can be healthy for your loved one.
That is awesome. And I think that's great advice for anybody out there. I do know I'm a part of a few groups that where women get together and they talk about, how to move forward and self-care and like moving your goals forward. And almost all of them start with, when you start your day, take some time out for you, whatever that may be, before you give it to the work, your job, before you give it to your loved ones, because it just grounds you. So that's excellent, excellent, excellent advice. Dr. Avon, um, from your experience and from your expertise, can you talk a little bit about what you think people should be doing in the area of self-care? Because we can all,
Sure.
I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a licensed therapist or anything like that. But I think you bring a value add to this discussion that puts it on a different level. So if you could just give us a little bit of your expertise in this.
Sure, sure. So before I do so, let me take it from a perspective of a personal experience and validate what both Ro and Vita have mentioned and touched upon. And that is, when you have a family member and a loved one, a significant loved one incarcerated, there's this fear and stress associated with denial, potential denial of a visit, potential denial of getting through the gate when you're allowed to visit in person because of your clothing, potential denial because you're not on the list, denial of parole. It is constant rejections, right, that one might be facing when you're dealing with a loved one in the system, and it's heartbreaking. And so you're feeling this tension and fear, and you're walking around with it all the time. And the very first thing that I would offer everyone is first take a moment to just acknowledge and own what you're feeling. It's okay. It's okay to say, I'm afraid. Give it a name. It's okay to acknowledge that I'm feeling a little bit lonely. I'm feeling a little uneasy and I'm feeling a little desperate here. Give it a name. That is your starting point of self-awareness so that you can take steps in terms of what to do. What would I offer? Forgive yourself, number one. Forgive yourself for anything that is on your list where you feel like you may have fallen short, and give yourself a big hug. And I seriously mean this. As I listen to Vita and I listen to Ro talk about what they do in the morning when they get up. When you're getting up, well, first of all, as Rose said, you've got to be strong on the outside in order to help your loved one on the inside. Get up in the morning and breathe. And I mean literally breathe. Just take a deep breath, cleansing breath. Breathe in and breathe out twice as long. That's number one. Get in touch with yourself and how you're feeling. Give it a name. Forgive yourself and find ways to stay in the moment and be mindful. It is so easy to get up and roll out of bed in the morning and start your day with a list of, oh, I've got to get in touch with the prison. I've got to, write a letter. I've got to find a way to get money in the canteen. I don't know how I'm going to get money for Christmas presents. I got to figure out how to have somebody take care of the kids. And it's the list goes on and on. And before you've had a day, a moment to just take time to breathe, to stretch, and maybe even to progress to exercise, you owe it to yourself to have just a little time, a focused time. Because here's the thing, and this taps into what Ro was talking about. If you talk about the physiology of stress and what happens, we're at a point right now where we really need to be strong and have our immune systems, kind of boosted. And what stress does is it taxes our system. And you think about, not getting into the medical parts of it, but the endocrine system, I mean, it gets severely taxed, just from stress. And so if we can learn how to take back the moment and figure out how to breathe, acknowledge what you're feeling, and then take steps towards those elements of self-care. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of other steps that you can take for self-care. I yield back to you.
So one of the things that I want to ask you is, you talked about naming what you're feeling, and that just hit home to me, because I don't think people say, some people do name it. They say, I feel guilty, or I don't think they acknowledge it on a daily basis. And I think for the folks watching, especially here, I think that that's so important. If you can run through a short list, if you can think of any, types of feelings people may be wanting to feel, or at least check in with themselves about, because they may not know how to name it, but maybe if they had an example or two more of, if it's not guilt, if it's something else, that they can kind of really check in with themselves, I think that could be very helpful.
Sure. So a typical list that I would start off with, feeling grief. There is a type of grief that is particular to this particular situation, and it's called disenfranchised grief. And what it really means is that you feel grief, and it's just as serious and just as painful as someone losing, a loved one through death. And so you're going through the struggle of mourning, and you don't know what you're feeling, but and the feelings of grief is very complicated. It's heavy, it's sadness, and it weighs you down. So grief, sadness, loneliness, irritated, angry. Angry is something really, really important to kind of tap into and to recognize. Many family members who have loved ones incarcerated also have children. And the thing about not tapping into these feelings is that if you have this underpinning and underlying of anger, you may find yourself not even aware of it, inadvertently snapping at your kid, showing up at work tensed, just, short with everyone. So it cascades into these other areas if you don't acknowledge feeling it, so that you can check yourself. There's this thing called bracketing. So if you are aware of your feelings, you journal it, write it down, or at least own it, speak it out, or try to identify what it is, then you basically can, manage those feelings. So your short list might also, in addition to the anger, in addition to the grief and the sadness, you may feel, here's a word, discombobulated. In other words, just completely out of sorts, walking around feeling like you're a zombie. And I know that to be true. And that phenomena, I'm sure that many of you are probably shaking your head saying, there are times where I went through an entire day and I'm like, how did I get here? Did I eat? Driving from A to B without even realizing that time is past. So understanding that you might be out of sorts. And so these are things that I think we really need to tap into, because once we do, we can start our journey towards the ultimate self-care, and that's healing.
Mm. Awesome. So, we have a question from the audience, and Liz Lewis asks, "How can I manage rejection towards my husband's situation of incarceration?" So, I'm assuming it's those days where you've maybe applied for compassionate release, or you may have clemency petition got denied, or some hearing you were supposed to go to didn't happen, or just those moments where how do you deal with self-care at a time where it literally feels like the wind has been taken from beneath your wings? And I'm going to open this up to Vita, because I know you have had a few moments where this was exactly it, and you had to overcome and continue. So how do you manage that?
So absolutely, it's hard, and I'm going to be absolutely honest about this. And I think it's important that we are honest about all of these different feelings that Dr. Hart Johnson she spoke of. And in all of those, I felt angry. I did feel frustrated. I mentioned the migraine, and so all these different things. But I did accept those feelings as I felt those feelings, and I felt that it was okay to feel those things. Now, how did I deal with it? I honored my feelings. I cried. I screamed. I wrote about it.
Mm.
I talked about it. Everybody who would listen, I talked to about it and shared. Um, and then after I went through all of those different feelings, and I realized that still at the end of the day, I had to take care, I had to regroup and figure out, what am I going to do next? What is my next plan? But the first step was to gather myself together, to feel my feelings, to feel that hurt, and understand that that hurt was okay. And then I just had to pick up my ball and get ready to play again.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's hard to hear, and it may sound a little, like, oh, that's easier said than done. And it sounds like that, but truly, truly, if you honor your feelings, and if you just regroup and take care of yourself first, you can feel well enough to pick up that ball and figure out what's next.
Yeah, no, and it makes perfect sense. It makes absolute perfect sense that if you're feeling when something, you have to feel your feelings, and acknowledge that you're feeling a certain way at a certain time, because if you don't do that, as you said, it's how can you pick up and go on? And then, like, that's part of why Dr. Avon, or I'm assuming this is part of Dr. Avon's whole point of, like, making sure that you're able to feel what you feel, know that you feel it, so that you can work through it. If you don't identify it, if you don't feel it, if you don't go through it, how will you be able to progress and help anybody if you're in denial about your own feelings? That's naming it, and being able to feel your feelings when you're feeling them, so that you can move on. It's all about self-care. All of that is a bucket of self-care. I did want to pivot to Ro and ask you, with you have thousands of people following you, and of those, what are you telling them in those moments where they're feeling rejected, or how to care for themselves in those particular moments?
Yeah. So, in response to Vita, when she was talking earlier about her brother's clemency denial, I started to get emotional, because I was there as well. And it was the most difficult and traumatic thing that I think I've ever been through, next to, believe it or not, the week leading up to my loved one's release, which we'll talk about another time. But I would literally, for I think it was about 6 weeks, I would be in random places, my desk sitting at work. I would be at the doctor's office in the waiting room. I would be grocery shopping, waiting in line, and just spontaneously, I would just start crying and I couldn't help it. And so, just like Dr. Avon and Vita said, you have to feel those feelings, because if you shove them down and you shove them down and you shove them down and you shove them down, eventually it's all going to come pouring out, and it'll be at the most inopportune time usually. So, like everybody said, I tell all of my members, my subscribers, feel those feelings. But here's the catch, at least for me. I give myself 24 hours to mourn, to grieve. Of course, it's going to last longer than that, but to check out, to stay in bed, to watch Netflix, to eat whatever junk food I want to eat. And then after those 24 hours, I force myself to get up, to go to work, to put on my sneakers and go for a run, to do all of the tasks of daily life. It does not mean that you're going to automatically feel better just because you're doing life again. It doesn't mean that the sun's going to come out and everything's going to be happy and sunshine and roses. But the longer you allow yourself to check out of life and stay in a depression, the deeper that depression will get. So you have to start living your life again, feeling those feelings, naming the emotions, understanding that they're there, but still living your life at the same time. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I have to empower myself, and I try to empower the people that I coach and support. I'm not a victim. I am a strong woman who's facing this awful situation. I get a choice. I can be the victim and I can let this system destroy my life, or I can pick myself up. I can ask myself, I would ask myself every single day, do I want to continue this? Is this still part of my path in life? You don't have to stay here. You don't have to do this. Nobody is forcing you to stay alongside this person. 99.9% of us want to be here, and we will. But by asking myself that question every single day and asking you to ask yourself that question every single day, you're in the driver's seat. You have control of your life. I want to be here. So now what can I do to stay happy, to stay healthy, to move forward? People would ask me all the time, I don't understand how your loved one is serving a 213-year sentence and you're happy and you're smiling every day. It is a lot of work. And there are so many ups and downs and extremely high highs and extremely low lows. And that's where the self-care helps. And it'll help keep you more even throughout this roller coaster of a journey.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Avon.
Yeah, I wanted to tap into something that Rose said that was very powerful, and that is if you don't address and acknowledge what you're feeling, there's this thing called complicated grief. And so what happens when you have this grieving process, you know, you've got the anger, you've got the sadness, you've got all of those mixed feelings that come with it. And by the way, you feel, you know, may feel like the world is just, everybody else is going on with life. And you even feel envy, you know, of those who have, you know, a family, a boyfriend, everyone else, you know, seems to be getting on with life better than you. And so that anger is just pent up, but unaddressed grief. And then you've got more crises that are piling on. And so now all of that gets pushed down. And so here it is that you're walking around kind of like a walking time bomb, so to speak, because you've got all of this stress, and all it takes is for a mop handle to break and you've fallen apart. And it, you know, so the thing that I would, suggest that in terms of self-care, number one, find a support system. Find a support system and attend those support systems. Don't hide away, because there's a safety net there. And to the degree possible, you will find some trusted relationships where you'll realize that you're not just feeling this in isolation. Number two, really check in with yourself with that element of self-awareness and define what you can control. You can't control everything. You can't control COVID, but what you can control is your reaction to it. You can't control the prison system. You can advocate, for what's going on right now, but what you can control is you will take these reasonable steps to stay connected. Give yourself permission to make decisions. Allow yourself, like Rose said, don't feel that you're locked in and you can't get out of this box, of isolation in this condition. Allow yourself to at least have that choice. And when you make that choice, you'll feel good about it. And then the last thing that I'll add, and this is something people don't talk about very much, but it's in alignment with grief work. And that's why grief is such a heavy underpinning in my theory. And that is, allow yourself to develop ritual. And what I mean by ritual, and I get chills saying that because it's such a heavy element of truth. When you are suffering loss, rather than to leave that empty hole there, allow yourself, especially during the holiday, to come up with a ritual that might help to substitute the missing person. Honor them by putting a Christmas bulb on the tree. Think about them at midnight at the same time they're thinking about you. Say a prayer together, sing a song together, talk to each other, come up with your own ritual, wear his or her shirt, those kinds of things. Allow that person to be integrated into those moments of loneliness and sadness. And it's okay, because those rituals do help. They help you to make a decision and take back your power as well. Thank you for letting me add to that.
Oh no, that was awesome. That was absolutely awesome. I had never thought about the idea of having a ritual or having a shared moment, especially during the holidays when even in pre-COVID or just in general in holidays time, that's when you're feeling the loss. I'm quite sure the deepest. I know that you start to think about how the holidays were, or you start to think about how they could be. And I really like that idea of having a ritual or having things that you can do. And this brings me to the next question that was from Diane Cabrera, who she asks, what can we do to help children or her son be aware of self-care techniques? Her children are all, her son is also living this with her, right? And a lot of people, it's not just the mom or the dad, it's also the kids. And so he's 13. And she's not so worried about him, but just in case she needs to kind of help him with his self-care. And we do know that there are tons of organizations out there for children. Well, I don't want to say tons because I don't want to make it seem like it's more than it is. But there are lots of organizations out there for children who have incarcerated parents, right? But I think that this is also a good space to talk about what to do with your children who may be suffering in silence, or they appear not to be, or they feel a little detached, but they're growing up, so they might be teenagers. So there's all kinds of things going on. Any advice, any tips? Go ahead.
I don't want to monopolize, but so there's two things. We write a lot of children's books, but I want to tap into what you said about a 13-year-old. The biggest advice that I can give is to ask questions and then listen. Not to direct the conversation, but allow them to talk. And they may not even have a name for what they're feeling, but you might start the conversation. John, I saw you the other day kind of staring off into the blue, and you look pretty sad. Or I notice you're not talking much, or you're not hanging out with your friends as much as well, we're in COVID. But have and don't be afraid to rehearse it. Think about it. How you communicate with your child. Start the conversation and then listen. Actively listen. not listening and coming up with a reason for why your dad or your mom is incarcerated and that kind of thing. Listen. So it's very important to do that with young children. And this is so, so incredibly important. And I'm very passionate about it. Be honest. You don't have to tell the whole story about where the parent is or what's going on. You don't have to tell the details about the conviction or the crime, but be honest, because when you start a foundation that's built upon mistrust and mistruth, um, children grow up to be so angry and heartbroken. And the very um, people who should surround them that they can actually confide in and trust, may have violated, that credibility. And so that's really incredible. Imagine how isolated and sad a child would be to find out that everybody else in the family knew about this except for me. And then I find out about it later on. And that's something that we see a lot. So be honest and be truthful, be compassionate, empathic, and just recognize that sometimes kids really don't know what they're feeling, but let them know that you were there for them. I love you. I'm going to be here for you. And we're going to figure out, I don't have all the answers, but we're going to find a way to get through it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I agree. And I think that those are wonderful tips for working with kids, because I agree that they might not even know what they're feeling, and that just the idea of just sitting down and talking to them would be awesome. Vita, did you want to jump in?
So I just want to jump in quickly from a different standpoint. So my children, um, they were young when I started advocating for their uncle. And what I learned is they were paying attention more than I ever thought. And I'm glad that I was honest with them and that I did talk with them. And because we traded, there were times that we traded vacations to go visit him because of the cost, because of how expensive it is. So, and those were things that I had to explain. But I know Diane asked the question rather. And so when we would go visit my brother and we would trade those vacation days, we would make sure that we did do some sightseeing wherever we were. And I've noticed that Diane has done the same with her son, making sure that, while she was advocating with her son and she was having him beside her to see what this was. And then so he was able to actually see the pain and witness the pain and the happiness at the same time, and seeing that there are so many people that's going through this together. So being honest, like Dr. Avon said, I think that's absolutely true, but you have to make sure too, the behaviors that you display in front of your children, that they're watching. They're watching when you think they're not watching. They're concerned when they see you sad. They're happy when you're happy, and they're thinking that when there's a possibility that your loved one will come home, they have that anxiety waiting as well. So keeping that line of communication is very important, and also just having that listening ear.
Mhm. I wanted to go. There's another question in the chat. Before I go into the 3 E's, because I do want to touch on that. I wanted to ask about one person in particular feels like a failure because she doesn't know how to help her husband. And so I know that we have, of course, I'm going to put a plug in. You can always get involved with FAMM. There are lots of us here to help and support you. But beyond that, I know that a lot of it is slow moving, right? You gotta pass a bill, you gotta like change a law, or there's so many different avenues and things that could happen. And it's slow moving. It's nothing that's normally, I guess, if you're at this point, it's not quick fixes for any of it. How does someone deal with the fact that they're unable to help at the pace that they feel they need to, and to the point of feeling like being an actual failure?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that you're by your loved one's side is helping a ton. And just acknowledging that will empower you and give you the confidence to say you are doing something. And I can so empathize with the way you feel because, like I said earlier, every moment outside of my job, I was trying to help and find a way because you do feel so desperate. But first of all, there are seasons and there'll be times where there's really nothing you can do, but you just being there by his side is helping him or helping her. Then there will be times where there's a big push, and that's when you can get the traction and you can go and you can push and you can move. And you just have to ride the waves up and down. And my second piece of advice is it takes an army. So just like Rabia said, get involved with groups like FAMM or other support groups. Stay educated on what's going on, but know that there will be times where it's quiet and that's okay. And you are doing enough. You're keeping a roof over your head. You're keeping yourself and your family fed. You're sending probably letters and phone calls and emails and money. You're helping in so many more ways than you're giving yourself credit for. So you have to acknowledge that and just know that you're doing your best and your best is enough.
Dr. Avon, do you have any advice on how a person can deal with feelings of being an actual failure because they're unable to help as quickly or as efficiently as they would like to?
Sure. I'm going to go back to self-awareness, and I'm going to tap back into that and kind of hone that point because it's so critical to self-care. Failure in this context is equated to having ownership of the problem. And I'll say that again. It's equated to having the sole ownership of the problem. And when you do that, you have to kind of, it gets cloudy and confusing. What do you actually have the power to do and to control? Because if you have this conflated or this idea that you should have been able to do X, Y, and Z, you're putting these high levels and setting the bar so high. Oftentimes advocates are turning into like paralegals. You know, they're figuring out how to write briefs. They're figuring out how to get in touch with their governors. They're taking on tasks, a new job, a new role, really where it's like what Rose said, it's incredible what you're doing. Accept the fact that you are taking on this new role as advocate, or perhaps not. You know, perhaps you leave that to the attorney, but be sure to define what it is that you have control over by putting the problem into perspective. It's a hard emotional journey. And like I said, when you continuously are faced with denial, it translates into fear and stress and hopelessness, and sometimes feeling like there's nothing within your control. Allow yourself permission to be human. You know, I know we all try to be superheroes, but allow yourself and acknowledge what you are able to do and embrace that. Because I think that if not, we forget and we lose perspective as to how it is that we can allow ourselves forgiveness for not knowing. You may not know how to do everything.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to ask, I want to pivot to the 3 E's. So Ro was on a previous show and she talked about the 3 E's. And I said, oh, are you going to talk about the 3 E's on this program? And she said, well, actually, they were from Dr. Avon. So Dr. Avon, can you explain the 3 E's and why they're significant to self-care?
Yep. One of the things, and thank you, Ro, for remembering the 3 E's and talking about it. You know, one of the things that people struggle with when they have loved ones incarcerated is that I'm living this life of a lie, and that I go to work and I make up a story, that I don't have a husband or I don't have a son who's incarcerated, or, they change the narrative, so to speak. That may be one way of dealing with it. Or they may feel like, I've got all these friends or people at work, they don't know that so and so is incarcerated. And so this incredible burden of feeling like you're just walking through life as a liar, as a failure, as a fill in the blank. And one of the things that I teach in a class that deals with symbolic imprisonment, grief, and coping theory is number one, the three E's. Number one, you don't have to share your story with anyone. You own the rights to your personal story. You don't have to share your story. The guide that I give for self-disclosure is under three conditions. You share your story with someone else, like in a forum today, because you want to empathize with other people who are feeling the same kind of pain. And then the two of you become a support network to each other. That trusted bond, they've earned the right for you to have that exchange with them. To educate in a forum like today. You're holding a class and you're helping people to tap into and identify and give a name to the feelings and to express themselves. When you give a name to what you're feeling, not only are you acknowledging it, but you're allowing it to be released. It lets go of some of the power that it has over you. When you allow it to be released, you've actually stated it, and now you said, I'm angry. I feel betrayed. I feel sad. I feel lonely. It's out there. And now we can take steps to do something about it. The last one is to empower others. And so I think you're hitting all of the three E's right now in this forum, because Ro talked about empowerment. She speaks to thousands of women, and she helps them to move from a victim status to a place of empowerment. FAMM helps people to become advocates, not only for their own family, but now they've found a way to take that trauma and translate it into something that's purposeful, that's meaningful, something that may be able to help someone else get through something that you learned how to deal with. And so I am so grateful for this forum, because it taps right into those three E's. And so I'll pivot over to Ro and let her fill in the blank for whatever I left out.
I think you did an amazing job. Ever since I took your grief and coping class years ago, I've been talking about the three E's because it's so helpful. For me personally, I lived such a double life that I developed severe social anxiety, where I had so many lies, I couldn't keep up with who I told what. And then if I met somebody new, I would get so scared. Oh my God, what if they ask me if I have a husband? What do I say? Do I lie? Do I tell the truth? What do I do? And I was crumbling on the inside. I didn't want to meet anybody new. I didn't want to have conversations with strangers. Small talk was the hardest thing in the world for me. And then it started trickling into my intimate relationships. So once I learned about the three E's, I again felt empowered I loved what you said about we own the rights of our own story. I felt empowered. I didn't have to share. And when I shared that with other people in Strong Prison Wives and Families, I had this girl come up to me after flying back from the Prisoner Family Conference in Dallas back to Florida. And she said, oh my gosh, I did the three E's on the plane. I was sitting next to somebody and he asked me some questions and I felt empowered to talk to him. And I educated him about my husband's case and blah, 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 blah. And we left shaking hands and he knew a little bit more and I felt better. And I've lived by that. And so have hundreds of thousands of people.
And I just want to throw out there, like FAMM, we have a branch of a big branch of our organization is family outreach and storytelling. And so we have a people who, Ann and Debbie, who talk to families on a regular basis. I mean, we have more people who talk to families, but they in particular, Ann helps people learn how to tell their stories to others. So there's of course, you don't have to share your story, but should you choose to, we have resources to help you tell that story, learn how to tell your story in a way that honors you, your loved one, and actually does all the other things: empower, educate, and so forth. So, and advocate. Um, so we are 5 minutes out, so we're about to end, but I wanted to go around and see if anybody had any, first of all, last closing remarks, but also any practical tips you want to make sure that people take away from this that you may have not shared or that we may have missed. I'm going to start with Vita.
Okay. So I wanted to be sure that I mentioned that my brother, I said earlier that he is free. So after serving 25 years, 10 months, and 12 days, he became a free man in July of last year. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful to FAMM for all the work that they put in, as well as his attorney, my angel Cody. But I found FAMM early on when I first started looking for a support group, someone that I could get information from, because for so long I did keep it to myself that my brother was in prison because of the stigma that came along with it. And now people are beginning to talk more about it, but there are so many people that still have their head in the sand about what's happening with mass incarceration. But once I started finding out information, I couldn't keep my mouth closed. I started talking to everyone. So I wanted to say that. But what I wanted to also say, while my brother was in, we made sure that we started preparing him for the outside. And what do I mean by that? So we spent time advocating for him, but I knew, or I felt, one day he would be coming home. And so when you spend all your time advocating, but sometimes people don't prepare for the release. So you should start finding out what your loved one's interest is. We were sending him, having books sent to him. We know he wanted to be a general contractor. And when he came home, he wanted to own his own building and different things like that. And he studied for that. And when he came home, well, he just moved in his first tenant in his building. And so different things like that. Driver's license. We knew that he was going to need driver's license. So we would have books sent to him, so that when he came out, then he could go get his license. And he did that right away. So I'm not saying do everything for them, but I'm saying to spend time getting them ready for reentry. And let's see. And what was the other thing I wanted to say? And then he also started his own consulting firm where he's consulting with other people like Cure Balance and stuff like that. So basically, I'm still going back to, yes, we advocate for them, but we also do what we need to do, not only to get them ready for the return, but for us to be ready for them to come home. I've talked to other people that was released around the same time that he was released, and their loved ones were not ready. They didn't necessarily have a stable place for them to stay. They didn't have the basic necessities. They had not looked into parking tickets or other things that they may have had that they needed to get taken care of. So look at those things as well.
Great. Ro?
I love that story from Vita. And we were both talking earlier about denials and clemency and that being the most difficult experience of our lives. My loved one, after 20 years, a bunch of months and days that I don't know the exact numbers, was released as well. And I think that there's a lesson in that from both of our stories, that there's always hope. No matter how low you get, there's always something to be hopeful for. And my husband has this quote that I absolutely love, and I try to share with people all the time. You can live 3 weeks without food. You can live 3 days without water. You can live 3 seconds without air, or 3 minutes. You can live 3 minutes without air. Leave it to me to mess up the quote. But you can't live 3 seconds without hope. There is always hope, and you have to grasp for it and find that silver lining, as difficult as it feels in the moment. I've been there over and over and over again. And once you find that silver lining, if you go to your support group and have them help you find that silver lining, you white knuckle it, you hold on to it, and that will carry you through. The second thing that I want to add is we're going into the season of the holidays right now, which is one of the most difficult times of year for those of us who have loved ones who are incarcerated. So if I could pass this along to you, especially for people who have children, if you can somehow figure out a way to involve your loved one in the holiday, whatever that looks like or can look like, especially right now with restrictions because of COVID, but maybe there's a way where you could set a time for them to call. If opening one present with your child with dad on the phone or mom on the phone, and they open it up together, that could be the present from dad or mom or Santa. Make it special that way. Or if your loved one's thing was saying grace every year, maybe save the phone call for him or her to say grace while they're on the phone before you eat dinner. Something, even if there's lockdown right now, maybe they can write a special letter and send it home, and then you read it to your child and take photos. Something that makes you feel that your loved one and your child's mother or father is included in the holiday will help so much. It's helped for years for the women and men at Strong Prison Wives and Families.
Thank you, Ro. Dr. Avon?
Yes. The first thing that I want to remind everyone of is just to take a moment in this whole journey of self-awareness and self-care. Just take a moment to return back to loving yourself. And I mean loving yourself fully and completely. You've done a lot. And everyone's doing a lot. So just take a moment right now and just take your arms and put it around yourself. And I'm talking to our panelists as well. And just love yourself, because you're doing a good job as best as you can. We're going through a lot of stuff right now. Just love yourself a little bit more. The second thing that I want to say to the audience, give yourself time to grieve and then to breathe. And what I mean by that is allow yourself, like Rose said, that time to get frustrated, to feel the grief, to feel the loneliness, but then allow yourself an opportunity to breathe. Just take one day, start off small, where you take 15, 20 minutes just to put your feet up and read, or find a way to get back to that person that you left behind before all the taxing things. And I say it to all of us. Before all the taxing things mounted on you and all the do's that you have to do, and even the don't, just take some time to give yourself permission to be you. Even if it's in the shower or sitting in your closet, find that time for you. And then finally, and I say this to all of us again, forgive yourself. We all try to be superheroes. We really do. And we do so much, and we're passionate people, we're loving people and caring people. You wouldn't be in this situation otherwise. Many people will just walk away and say, this is messy stuff, and I don't want to be involved with it. But you're in this work, and it's hard work, and it's emotional work, and it's difficult work. But guess what? You're doing it. And so for that, I am so proud of you and so proud of us. Just love yourself just a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Avon, Ro, and Vita for joining us. I did want to make a plug because the video team would kill me if I didn't. But Vita is having, we have a self-care video from Vita that we recorded a while back that we're going to be releasing on Tuesday at 12 o'clock. And so it's a part of our Got a Minute series where we're basically taking the stories of people. We're giving advice. Well, we're not giving advice, but people are giving their experiences with different topics. It's new. It just launched. And so we're really excited about it. I've seen Vita's piece. It's wonderful. And so we'll send that out when it gets out, but I just wanted to make that plug. And so thank you all for joining us, and replay this video over and over and over again if it helps you get through this holiday season. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.